The relationship of the Philippines with China it's been about the West Philippine Sea for many years, and you are one of the strongest voices, right, against China when it comes to the West Philippine Sea, rightly so, the actions in the West Philippine Sea. But Professor, knowing what we know now, is it time to realign with China on some other aspects? How would you do it, considering you're very clear with your West Philippine Sea advocacy with UNCLOS? Yun ang right is might. Pero nagbago na nga, sabi mo, might is right na ngayon. Right? Yun ang naging opening mo. What should the Philippines do with China? Professor Arugay, good morning to you.
Good morning, Karen. Thanks for having me.
All right, I want to start first with where are you now? I don't know, you're not in the Philippines right now.
No, I'm a visiting scholar here at the Center for Southeast Asian Studies in Kyoto University in Japan.
Oh, okay. So you're there for a few months?
Yes, for a few months to do research and hopefully finish my book.
Okay, with that. But that's good. So I'm sure what's happening right now between the US, Israel, and Iran is helping shape your book, I would have to say. So let's start with that first. How is this changing the face of geopolitics? You just heard right now, what if the Strait of Hormuz doesn't open? What if they don't follow what President Trump has asked? Right? What happens?
Well, Karen, this is the greatest disruption in the world that, as we have witnessed in the past few years, if not decades. This is the greatest economic disruption that we're facing. Much worse, people are saying much worse than COVID. And COVID was that really, shook every one of us. Oil prices hasn't risen this much. But Karen, the thing is, in terms of geopolitics, it really tells you that we're entering a really different global order, an order wherein rules and institutions are no longer followed, where the world that we are all fearing from, especially given that we're a small power, we're not as strong, where might makes right. Where military force that is being used to carry out foreign policy objectives unilaterally without consultation. But the economic crunch, I think, Karen, is the one that is really being felt almost by everyone. And even if, let's say, the Strait of Hormuz opens today, we will still feel this, economists are saying, for the next 3 months at the very least. And we don't know how this will also further empower Iran. And given that there's even current alliance with the Houthis. So therefore, the Strait of Hormuz is something that will be a critical choke point, and therefore a critical place and space in geopolitics, wherein all of us, particularly in Asia, will be very much affected.
Okay. Now, since you spoke about that, I'd just like to mention, because we came from a long break, April 1, good move by members of this government. You have the DFA Secretary, Secretary Lazaro, DOE Secretary Garin. They met with Iranian Ambassador Youssef Esmalzadeh and essentially asking for safe passage for oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. This is for essentially our supply, Iran pledging to allow a safe, unhindered passage for Philippines-flagged ships. Pero ang nangyayari dito, di ba, parang sinabi ni President Trump, kanya-kanya na kayo ng kuha. Bahala na kayo, yun eh. Right? Yes. It started with President Trump saying, go ahead and get your oil. Like, right, you're on your own, and the Philippines already started that by meeting with Iran. Let's talk about that whole scenario. Imagine each and every country negotiating for themselves safe passage in that strait.
Right. Karen, this military action, because, you know, in the US, they don't want to call it war because that will require congressional approval. So the exact language is, the one that is being used by the Trump administration is this military action of the US and Israel, if I might emphasize, against Iran, started off with the idea to cripple the regime in Iran. But what we're seeing now, given that what we're seeing is the increasing leverage of Iran to dictate what happens to the energy supply of countries, particularly in Asia, but we're also seeing gas prices in the US increasing. So I think this is why Trump is also feeling the pressure. And his latest social media post is borderline, diplomatically speaking, unbecoming of a president, cursing, etc. But let's go back. The idea that now each country has to negotiate with Iran tells me that Iran is coming out of this, everything that's happening to them, stronger than before, because they have the ability to deprive the world of energy. And not only that, with energy comes everything: food, fertilizer, logistics. All prices will increase. And in the end, the objectives of the Trump administration and the Netanyahu government to cripple the regime, to decapitate by assassinating the supreme leader and all the other elites, and maybe to invite the Iranian people to take over, didn't happen. Now, each of us, particularly weaker countries, have to negotiate with Iran. And this puts Iran in a much stronger position.
Yes.
But I do hope our government is doing more, because our neighbors are actually already planning ahead. And is actually telling its people to conserve energy. I just listened last night to the address of the Singapore Prime Minister, Prime Minister Wong. He addressed the Singapore people. He assured them that the government is doing everything, but he also gave detailed plans of what needs to be done in the coming day, but to solicit contributions from each Singaporean citizen, because each of us Filipinos can do something in terms of conserving, in terms of being able to help. Government will help. But just like during COVID, this requires a whole of society, a whole of nation perspective, more than just what the government can do.
Yeah. Now, can the Philippines rely on this agreement with Iran? I think it's interesting that you said that in this whole scenario, Iran was given much leverage. Now you have many countries negotiating with them directly, considering in the past, many countries may not have proactively engaged with Iran.
Yes, in fact, while we have maintained diplomatic relations with Iran for decades, because we're part of the U.S. alliance, our relationship with Iran didn't really prosper or didn't really deepen compared to, for example, some of our other Southeast Asian neighbors. Now as we're trying to address this global energy crunch and how it's affecting us. And the Philippines is one of the most affected, because we only have one refinery. We get our oil, 99% of our oil goes through that strait.
From the Middle East. We get most from the Middle East. Yeah.
Yes, and we have completely deregulated our oil industry. So the guardrails that some of our countries have, neighboring countries, I mean, we didn't have it. So we're completely vulnerable, and therefore maintaining this agreement. But Karen, the agreement is between Philippine ships, right? But what about ships that contain the oil that we will likely get? What if they're from countries that Iran doesn't want to pass through the strait? So this agreement is great. At least there's some diplomatic, things that are being done by the Marcos Jr. government. But it's much more complicated than just allowing Philippine flagged ships. Because we're buying oil from private companies, and if these private companies, Iran decided that, oh no, they're too close to the US, or they're too close to some of the countries that are on our blacklist, then that oil might not reach us at all.
Now, in terms of optics, I mean, in Southeast Asia, in most of Asia, actually, the Philippines is known as the strongest ally of the US with a mutual defense treaty. So, number one, how does this look optics-wise that the Philippines dialogued with Iran? But on another note, isn't the US somehow responsible for ensuring that the Philippines gets what it needs at a time like this, considering we are the strongest ally in Southeast Asia? Is the US doing enough for the Philippines?
Right. Karen, I think part of the conversations back at home is really trying to measure whether this alliance is still benefiting us. But
Yeah.
let's look at the broader picture. Our alliance with the United States that's been going on for decades and decades have surely had benefits, right? It has cost, definitely. I mean, US bases back during the Cold War and all of that. But at the end, I think what happened under this specific administration in the US is that it never consulted its allies, particularly in this action against Iran. It didn't even consult its NATO allies.
Yeah.
So therefore, for Trump, you can see that his policy is really, he doesn't really pay a lot of attention to what happens with the allies. He doesn't really have a concern. This is really something, a unilateral US first policy, more than previous administrations that somehow looked at it from the perspective of the US and the infrastructure of allies that it was able to build. So unfortunately, from the Trump administration perspective, what the allies' interests are don't really as matter much as what the interest of Trump. Karen, this is the administration that imposed tariffs on its allies. So I think that is not really, I mean, if the US didn't really think about the Philippines, Japan, and all of its other allies, this is just consistent with this Trump 2.0 foreign policy.
Yeah. Okay. I want to ask you about the possibility of, we've seen World War I. We've seen, we haven't seen it, but I mean, we've read about it. We know about it, right? World War I, World War II. Is there a possibility of another world war? Okay, I want to ask you about Operation Epic Fury. So for our viewers, Operation Epic Fury is the goal of the US is essentially to obliterate, that's the word, obliterate Iran's missiles and production, annihilate its navy. These are very strong, annihilating completely zero, walang matira.
That's right.
Sever its support for terrorist proxies, ensure it never acquires a nuclear weapon, although we do have to remember that there are Western countries that have nuclear weapons, right? More than a month since, the question, how has this been achieved and how dangerous is this Operation Epic Fury objectives? Can it lead to another global war?
Right. Well, the objective of the Trump administration is to decapitate the regime. This is to completely deprive it of the ability to project military power. But Karen, this is not to be on the side of the Iranians, but Iran has never embarked on any proactive conflict or war, right? In fact, it has always been defensive in nature. When there were attacks last year, it launched its missiles, etc. But this nuclear weapon possession has been going on for decades. And during the Obama administration, there were some achievements in terms of having a deal. But let's remember, the Obama nuclear deal with Iran was used as a weapon of Trump when he campaigned for the first time and won the presidency. And therefore, Iran has always been in the mind of Trump. But going back to your question, World War III, sana naman hindi. I mean, what the world needs right now is not another world war, but we might, what we're looking at, and given how the US has been behaving, there might not be a deliberate intention, because usually wars are a combination of deliberate intentions and unintended actions. So in international relations, there's this term, we might be sleepwalking towards it.
Yeah.
We might put in place the world and certainly the most powerful nation. So this is, I think, an appeal. What will prevent a World War III? Restraint, I
Yeah.
think. Restraint, responsibility, and leadership. I think those are key. And by leadership means not the parochial interest of your country,
Yeah.
but leadership in terms of what will benefit the world. Karen, there used to be a time wherein what is good for the US is good for the world.
Yeah.
Right? I don't think under the current administration that is the same calculus. It seems like what is good for the US might not necessarily be good for the world, and therefore US foreign policy actions tend to be detrimental to all of us who are just passive receivers of whatever actions these great nations decide to do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you talked about, just very quickly, the Obama nuclear deal. So I've just checked it now, right? And that was a landmark agreement in 2015 between Iran and five countries, actually. The US, the UK, France, China, Russia, plus Germany was in this deal, and the European Union. And the deal was Iran actually agreed to cap its nuclear capabilities if they lifted international sanctions. So ang tanong ko sa inyo, did Iran do that?
Well, it's a combination. The thing is, while the deal was signed, there were perceptions that Iran was not fulfilling parts of the deal. And this became the lightning rod for the Trump campaign in saying that US foreign policy under Obama and the Democrats made America weak and made America more threatened because let's remember the Iranian government, its foreign policy is one, to destroy Israel, and therefore Israel occupies a prominent place in US foreign policy. Israel is an ally as well, and you really have an Iranian government, and this is a product of history going back to the Shah, the Iranian Revolution, the first Ayatollah Khomeini, that Iran and the US had really bitter relations. The hostage crisis that happened during the Carter administration. So what I'm saying is, it's not just a black and white thing. Iran might have not really fulfilled some parts of the deal, but the key is to continue to negotiate. And before this military action by US and Israel, there were actually talks, if I'm not mistaken, in Geneva. And Iran was already in the cusp of agreeing to a deal until the US launched Epic Fury. Right?
Yes. I attended, it was like a presentation by Franz Lutz. He's an American pollster. This was in a private setting. And he said he had a survey on the American people. And I want to ask you your thoughts, given the history that you know, right? So the American people supported the war on Afghanistan, the war on Syria, wars that the US conducted. And yet, for some reason, in that survey, majority of the American people didn't support the war on Iran.
Yes.
And their analysis was because it was preemptive. Do you think that's it? Or is it because this particular war affects their economy, their daily life?
I think that's the latter, right? But if you notice, when Trump made certain speeches, certain remarks, he keeps on saying that we don't need the Middle East. We don't need to do this in the Middle East. That begs the question, then why did you launch military actions? If there's nothing in the US interest to do these actions, why were these actions done? And this really confuses a lot of us studying conflict, geopolitics, because usually states have rational, objectives when they carry out military force. Because Karen, this military action is from like $100 million every day for the US economy. And in fact, the Trump administration is going to ask $50 billion more. Can you imagine if you're an American taxpayer, you're already getting high gas prices. A gallon of gas is already $1 more expensive than before. And then you're going to be asked that you're going to be paying for a war that you didn't want in the first place, that there's no clear American strategic interest. So I think I can understand the combination of factors here, why this war is increasingly becoming not just unpopular, but something that Americans didn't want to have. And we might see the impact of that in their coming midterm elections in October.
So I think here's a good closer question for you, Professor. As we see alignments in the world change, we're seeing it, right? I mean, if you listen right now to, I believe, the mayor of London, he did say that what he wants is for Britain to go back to the EU. Right? From Brexit to now, it's a whole shift of we should go back to the EU. But this is what I want to ask you. So there are alignment and priority changes worldwide. We have a superpower in our backyard, and that is China. Right. The relationship of the Philippines with China it's been about the West Philippine Sea for many years, and you are one of the strongest voices, right, against China when it comes to the West Philippine Sea, rightly so, the actions in the West Philippine Sea. But Professor, knowing what we know now, is it time to realign with China on some other aspects? How would you do it, considering you're very clear with your West Philippine Sea advocacy with UNCLOS? Yun ang right is might. Pero nagbago na nga, sabi mo, might is right na ngayon. Right? Yun ang naging opening mo.
Yes.
What should the Philippines do with China?
Well, China is a reality. I mean, Karen, sabi ko nga sa mga estudyante ko, if there's a technology that can pull us away from where we are in the map right now and put us in the middle of the Pacific Ocean so that we don't have disputes with our neighbors, ginawa na natin. But this geography is our destiny. This is given to us. And China is a reality. This is a superpower, our neighbor, we share maritime boundaries with. So I think the key is, while we must, of course, protect our national interest, I think it's quite clear that our foreign policy should not be monopolized by a singular issue. Yeah. Right?
Tama.
What I think is needed right now is not really realignment with China, but to build trust, to build strategic trust. And trust is a two-way street, right? So there must be actions on our side. Primarily, I think it's important for the government, the Marcos Jr. government, to speak with one voice on this. But it's also important that China shows that it's a responsible superpower. And I think China has an opportunity right now, given how the US is behaving. I've heard experts that are saying that it seems like China is the mature superpower at the moment, given what is happening with how other superpowers are behaving. So China must also realize that it cannot just use its hard power, that it must be able to cultivate good relationships with its neighbors. So I think it takes a two-way street. But going back to us, what we need...
What we can do.
What we can do. I think remember President Marcos Jr.'s foreign policy. Friends to everyone, enemies to no one.
Yeah.
I think that is independent foreign policy. I think for us, we must look at this as we are willing to cooperate, to work with countries that share our interest, and that might include China on a number of aspects. I mean, other countries like Vietnam, they even water cannon each other with China, but they have vibrant economic relationships, they have vibrant diplomatic, political relationships with each other. The same with other countries. So I think what is important is that we have to be a bit more sophisticated.
Yeah.
A bit more.
Good point. Like Vietnam and Malaysia.
Right. But for us, it's quite difficult because, we took China to court and, there's that, that dimension in the relationship. But China always says that it is willing to work with countries. We concentrate on mutual interests, and on areas wherein there are mutual interests. I think the South China Sea issue disputes should not be a hindrance, right? So, in other words, I understand that for the Philippines, right may right, like we are always on the side of international law, of what is appropriate, of what is morally correct. But foreign policy, as I always say, is a combination of values and interest. And in the world right now, we need to be a bit more pragmatic. We need to be a bit more savvy. We need to ensure that our foreign policy will serve the interest of our people, and not just, standing on something and yet suffering from it. So I think, Karen, in the end, if China wants to work with us, if it's on the basis of mutual interest, so long as this doesn't require giving up any of our strategic interests, that's fine. But I think China must also show that it is a country to be trusted. And I think that's the best way to move forward.